record. That was well anticipated. So good afternoon, Mark Scheifmeyer, the city hearing examiner. I've been asked to convene a public hearing in response to an application for a variance submitted by Copper Ridge LLC as part of its project known as Three Lakes Crossing. And then this application, Copper Ridge seeks a variance from the city's standard fence requirements, asking for a heightened fence from what is allowed by the city's regulations. In advance of today's hearing, first of all, I should indicate that that bears the city's case number TUM-24-0928. The applicant appears today through Even Man of Soundbelt Homes / Copper Ridge. The city appears through Alec Baruch, planner. And in advance of today's hearing, I've received the staff report authored by Mr. Baruch and have reviewed it together with all of its attachments. So I am familiar with the materials. I've not undertaken a physical site inspection, but I have undertaken a remote site inspection utilizing Google Street Maps to examine the properties, all adjoining properties, to get a better sense of the property in question and its environs. So to that extent, I am familiar with the property. The purpose of today's hearing is threefold. It is to hear from city staff and following up its staff report. It's an opportunity for the applicant to explain more fully why it believes that the variance is to be granted. And then finally, an opportunity for members of the public, if any, to be heard regarding this application. The record should reflect that to date, there has been no public comment received, and the screen to suggest that there are no members of the public present today. But again, we'll confirm that as we get to that phase of the hearing. So we'll begin with city staff and a presentation by Mr. Baruch, perhaps others of city staff. Everyone who does testify today will do so under oath. We'll begin with Mr. Baruch. Mr. Baruch, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you and good afternoon. Before you today is a request for a variance to construct a 72-inch tall solid panel fence along Lot 29 within the Three Lakes Crossing plat at the corner of Henderson Boulevard Southeast and 68th Ave Southeast. I would like to outline how the city reviews property setbacks, how the fence ordinance is implemented, and our analysis of the variance criteria. Corner lots are defined as a lot that has frontage on or abuts two or more intersecting streets. Front yards are defined as a yard lying between the front line of a lot or front property line and the front setback line, and extend across the full width of a lot. This is further depicted in the definition section of the zoning ordinance, which shows the front yard setback along any portion of the property that abuts the street. Based on these definitions, Lot 29 in the Three Lakes Crossing subdivision was categorized as a corner lot, which has front setback along Henderson Boulevard Southeast, 68th Ave Southeast, along the entrance road to the subdivision, and the frontage of the lot where the driveway is located. The fence height regulations have specific restrictions when a fence is proposed within setbacks, and even further restrictions for fence heights within setbacks on a corner lot. The ordinance gives two options for fences within the setback on a corner lot. Fences shall be limited to the first option would be fences limited to 36 inches in height for a distance of 15 feet from the intersection of the property lines abutting the street, and 42 inches in height for the remainder of the front yards facing on any street. And then alternatively, the second option would be fences may be permitted to a maximum height of 78 inches from the ground in the front and or side yard on a flanking street if the portion above 36 inches is composed of open work in such a manner that 80% of any portion can be seen through on oncoming traffic and by oncoming traffic and pedestrians. The history and background of the fence on Lot 29 is included within the staff report. The applicant has been very responsive to the city when this issue was brought up and worked with us to understand how the ordinance was being applied to this lot. In reviewing the applicant's responses to the variance criteria, staff has also analyzed that criteria. There are 5 variance criteria listed within 1858-040 of the Tumwater Municipal Code. A variance may only be granted if all 5 of the variance criteria are met. Staff's analysis boils down to a few of the criteria not being met. For criteria 1, staff does not believe that the special conditions exist for this development, or that the literal interpretation of the provisions of the code would deprive the property owner of the rights commonly enjoyed by other properties within the community. Other properties throughout the city have met these corner fence height regulations where required, and the Susan Lakes example is described within the staff report. While there's a large grade at the rear of lot 29 due to tall retaining walls along Henderson Boulevard that would allow for more visibility into the backyard of this property, staff believes there would still be privacy and safety for the lot with one of the corner lot options, or one of the corner lot fence options allowed by the ordinance. Additionally, the retaining wall provides additional privacy as the backyard is set below grade. For criteria 2, staff does not believe that there are special conditions or circumstances that are not the result of action by the applicant. There were opportunities throughout the development of the subdivision to orient a landscape track along the side of the lot, similar to how lot 30 has a landscape track adjacent to it, so it would not be considered a corner lot. As a result, the corner lot fence requirements would need to be applied to this lot and any other corner lots within the subdivision. For criteria 3, staff believes that granting a variance for a solid fence would be a privilege conferred to this property that has not been provided to other properties within the same district. For properties within the city limits, staff has been applying these corner lot fence regulations since the ordinance was implemented in 1984. The same diagram, distance, and height regulations have been in place over this time. Granting a variance for a solid fence would be a privilege to this property that was not provided to other corner lots throughout the city. And lastly, there is not an exception built into the ordinance for meeting site distance requirements for vehicles that allow an opaque fence to be installed within the setback on a corner lot. For criteria 4, staff agrees with the applicant that installing a 72-inch tall fence would not be materially detrimental to the public welfare as the site distance requirements appear to be met. And for criteria 5, staff does not believe that the reasons outlined in the application justify the variance or that a 72-inch tall solid panel fence would be the minimum variance that would make possible the reasonable use of the land. Staff believes that the proposed fence configuration would provide a benefit that other properties within the city have not been granted in the same configuration. The lot configuration was the result of the applicant's actions, and a building permit has been approved for the construction of a single-family home on lot 29, where a fence meeting the ordinance requirement could be constructed along Henderson Boulevard Southeast and 68th Ave Southeast, which would provide ample privacy and screening. Due to the application not meeting all of the variance criteria, staff recommends denial of the application, and we'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Just one or two, Mr. Brook, and you may or may not be in any position to answer. I understand you may not. We're dealing with an ordinance that's 40 years old, enacted in the 1980s. The applicant, the requesting party, the applicant, has suggested that that ordinance is clearly based upon line of sight concerns, and how in this case those concerns are simply not in play. Do you have any reason to know the purposes for the enactment of this provision? Is there anything in the ordinance that says its purposes, or is there anything else historically that you have indicating the specific reasons for this particular requirement? This is a long-winded question, sorry. While it may be intuitive that line of sight's an issue, do you have anything confirming that?
The intent section of the code does specifically call out establish minimum requirements and standards for fencing where needed to promote safety, provide screening to safeguard privacy, and to protect the aesthetic assets of the community in general. So that is probably what I would lean on as far as the intent of the fence ordinance.
Okay, that is responsive. I appreciate that. And that would be found in the preamble to the ordinance?
That would be found in the fencing section of code. At the top, there's an intent section.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. That's the only
Welcome.
question I had for city staff. So, and I assume that that completes the city's presentation.
Yes, it
All right.
does.
We'll then turn to the applicant. Mr. Mann, you had earlier anticipated Mr. Wilson's involvement as well. If we get to the conclusion of your testimony and he's not yet had an opportunity, I'll let you decide whether you want to wait a few minutes more or whether you feel that's important. So we're not there yet. We'll see if we get there. So let's begin with your testimony. Let's have you first sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Actually, I'll real quick point of order. The other Evan Mann Soundbuilt Homes that has logged in is actually Kurt Wilson. I think the link that he had wasn't functional. I shot him my email just to get him access. So
okay.
If and when I believe he will have some points to make. It will be showing on Zoom as a second Evan Mann, but it's actually Kurt Wilson. Oh, there he goes. He's changed his name.
I wondered why we were having two of you, mystery solved.
Sure. Fair enough. Well, I appreciate the chance to speak to this item. So I'm wondering, am I able to share my screen for materials?
Mr. Brook?
Yes, there should be the ability to share.
Give me just a moment. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation here. Let's see. Just for, let's see, is everybody seeing PowerPoint?
I am, yes.
Okay, and then if I hit that button, is everybody still seeing that?
I'm seeing the reference to chapter 1846.
Right. Yes, exactly. Okay, perfect. Okay, so just wanted to jump in first and note that we're talking about the intent of the fencing code, and very clearly the intent is stated here directly from code that and a little emphasis added here, but to promote safety, privacy, and aesthetic assets for the community. So I wanted to speak to those particularly to show that we actually meet the intent of the code. For one, safety. The intent of this code, and we'll get to the next slide in a moment, is for visibility and sight distance, right? So the heights that are defined in there in this piece of code are, and even some of the setbacks or the front yard heights and corner yard heights are very clearly intended to allow for that visibility. And when we brought this forward as a variance, the very first thing that we were asked for was, show us the sight distance. And so we'll get to that slide, but sight distance is the key here, and we meet sight distance. So that's one of the things that we really want to make sure that's understood, that when this is developed, it has ample radius on each corner of this lot that provide significant amounts of sight distance. Secondly, privacy for future homeowners. In this particular instance, this lot 29 sits a bit lower than Henderson and the access road. So without having, with the way it's positioned, having that fence, not come up to a full 6 foot height really puts them in a fishbowl for anybody who's parked along that access road, maybe leaving the site, could potentially be looking directly down into their yard. And so, again, privacy and security, we truly believe that this code, unintended consequences, that these future homeowners will not enjoy privacy or security that other future homeowners do. So that's something to be considered. Last is aesthetics. All of the other homes in this community will have standard 6 foot tall cedar fences on 3 sides of the home. This would create a different lot with a different look for negligible, if any, I guess arguably no value to the community or to the homeowner. Again, if the intent is for safety and privacy, we've proven it's safe, but we've proven that it will also remove the privacy for this lot. So moving forward, this is the diagram that was in the code. I believe it's from 1984, based on the ordinance search that we did. This is the diagram that is in the code that shows what the intent of these fences are. So you can see the lots that they're considering here don't look anything like lot 29. Okay, we've got ample radius. That's a significant 24 foot radius, right? So we've got a lot of room here to see around these corners. In this case, in this case, if you look at the lot 29 where it intersects with Henderson, so this would be your access road. This is Henderson. If you were to extend this corner, right? If you were to extend it to the actual 90-degree angle considered in this diagram, you have 24 feet plus on each side where there's no fence now, right? Because we're using a radius, so our fence is being built along the radius. So that visibility is significant compared to what's anticipated in this code. So while again, we recognize that this is the diagram and this is how their code was written with this intended, doesn't capture or anticipate what is actually being built currently in the city of Tumwater. So here's the site distance exhibit to show we've got significant site distance allowed both directions, 350 feet to the south, 350 feet to the north plus. No issue of site distance whatsoever as it relates to these lots. So I think that's critical to note. And engineering has weighed in. Jared Cruz with the city of Tumwater weighed in and said, I have no concerns with this. Basically, this is not a concern. This is, if it comes to life safety issues, there's no concern with having that fence. Here you can see the fence is actually 14 feet from the site distance triangle. So from the face of the fence where we would have it to the site distance triangle, you're 14 feet. So again, significant site distance. You can see well around this corner in any direction without any kind of hindrance to pedestrians or vehicles. This kind of diagrams out a little bit what we anticipate the fence would do. So essentially we would have a standard 72-inch fence that starts 20 feet back from the tangent. So in this case, the tangent being here, you'd start 20 feet back from there, just a standard fence, right? You don't want the fence extending beyond the front of the home in a plat, typically one along the side yard. It would extend around the curve, and there's already existing 6-foot fence along Henderson that is allowed per code. So really it's just the fence in question is just this small, probably 70-foot section that would come around the corner and provide privacy and security for lot 29's rear yard. So that's just so you have a good context of the extent of what we're asking with this variance. I want to make sure one of the things that we kind of brought this forward because we had talked to staff about this pretty clearly and said, hey, you know, here's the logic of what we're going through, and we were actually directed towards this. You know, this may be a good opportunity for a variance considering all of the variables. Mike Matlock, who's on this call, you know, suggested that we move forward with a variance. And then, you know, once we enumerated the criteria, we get a recommendation of denial, which was a bit of a surprise. Next, I think the most important part is one of the conditions that we need to meet is that that this property would benefit, or I guess wouldn't have any benefit that the remaining or surrounding community has. So when we started to do a research on the city of Tumwater and their fence ordinance and how they're applying it, we came to find that actually they aren't. So I think it's really important that we look at that. So this is 4914 Lambskin Street Southwest in the city of Tumwater. Very clearly you can see 6-foot tall cedar fence at an intersection of a corner lot along the side. This is a perfect example of where they would say, well, that has to be 36 inches with an additional 80% visibility. What value does that add to the community or to this home? I would argue 0. And so this is an example of an existing condition in the city that's not being applied. Again, we're looking at 4842 Lambskin Street Southwest. This fence, that condition was not applied. So it's not being applied equally or evenly across the city. 4804 Lambskin Street Southwest, relatively new communities. These are not super old neighborhoods. Again, you can see 6-foot tall cedar fence. So the neighborhood or the city of Tumwater citizens are enjoying the benefit of 6-foot tall privacy cedar fence on their side yard. Here's 6805 Kersop Road Southwest. Again, 6-foot tall cedar fence. It's become standard across the industry and across the entire Puget Sound region that 6-foot tall cedar fences are the industry standard for privacy and for security. And requiring this particular lot to have a reduced privacy and visibility, gains nothing for the city. As they've already stated, site distance is adequate and there's no concern there, but it only hinders this particular lot. Again, 7014 Miraset Street Southwest. Another example of a 6-foot tall cedar fence, potentially taller than 6 foot on a side yard, even on a busy road. 6934 Southwick Court Southwest. Again, another corner lot with a 6-foot tall cedar fence. 7056 Southwick Court Southwest. Another one. So that really is telling for us that that this really isn't being applied, and we're going to be held to this standard that the city itself is not universally applying to the community. The one thing that's really interesting is that the way the city has defined the fronts of a lot, effectively, we'll go back to the exhibit here. If you look at lot 29, the city is basically saying, well, because it's got 3 streets on 3 sides, well, they apply a front yard to all of those, which is a unique situation. I would imagine that if the hearing examiner works in various jurisdictions, typically a front is assigned or established, sides are assigned and established, and rears are assigned and established. When there's an intersection with a corner lot, oftentimes we call it a flanking yard, or there's other determinations, but this is a clear indication that the city has not contemplated this scenario as it relates to fences. And then one other item, again, just that staff looked and in the record read in that Susan Lakes, as an example of a project, has met this standard. But again, that's a cherry-picked recent project that was that standard was pushed on by the city, whereas majority of the projects within the city are not meeting the standard, and this is not being applied. There's no code enforcement that's being done to regulate people who have built fences on their side yards. So it's very clear that this is not something that the city has been applying as a standard. And as you noted, it's 40 years old or older, and just doesn't contemplate the current lot configuration. So that's my testimony. I appreciate the time, and I'll pause and see if Kurt has any points he'd like to add in, if now's the time.
Okay, so first of all, Mr. Mann, you've utilized this PowerPoint for your presentation. I'll need it as an exhibit, so you'll need to send that to the city, and I guess they can send it to me.
Sure.
But I'll need that done at the conclusion of the hearing. So okay. So Mr. Wilson, you've heard Mr. Mann's testimony. Is there anything you would like to add to it?
Yes.
If that's the case, then let's have you sworn first.
Okay,
So
let me just park my car here real quick so I can put my hand up.
all right, I don't need your hand up.
Okay.
You to be swearing. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Oh, and so in addition to Mr. Mann's testimony, what would you like to say?
Oh, I'd just like to reiterate the fact that the way that this house is oriented and the entrance to the neighborhood, headlights coming in from the from one direction will have, lights coming towards that house and its rear yard, the downstairs windows. And as Evan said, it does sit in a fishbowl. So there's a sidewalk that would abut where we would put the fence on the property line. So not only pedestrian traffic, but also vehicular traffic impact coming off of the busy road that Henderson that's on our frontage. People turning in from there will headlight height would not be necessarily blocked because of the elevation of the lot relative to the sidewalk grade and having that low fence. So there's a number of aspects that concern us here. And as a builder of building thousands and thousands of homes in the Puget Sound, fences have become the paramount issue for new homeowners for retaining pets in their yards and security and safety of their children, and having a place for them that they can stay in the backyard rather than playing in the streets, kind of thing. So we take it very serious, and it's the section of code just seeing that it's not being uniformly applied across the city, and just with a 5-minute Google Street search, finding this number of examples, I'm sure there's hundreds of more that we can pull up by just driving around, given how quick we found those. I think we're the ones that are going to be prejudiced from being able to provide the right solution for fencing the rear yard for this future homeowner, and will also be financially impacted by creating an inferior situation relative to the other lots in there, because it'll be a detriment to a future home buyer looking at that particular home and lot going, well, why can't that fence be higher? And we'll have to say, well, we're stuck. The city's making us do that. And, in reality, what's going to happen is everybody's going to forget about this, and the homeowner's going to wait a few years, and they're going to go make it 6 foot, and the city's not going to enforce it, just like they're not enforcing everything else around town. So I know this is a difficult one for you. You're looking at the code and the situation here, but there's a reality aspect here. And really, when you start looking at the intent that Evan outlined, public health, safety, and welfare, sight distance is the issue. And that's what we see jurisdiction after jurisdiction. And when you read into the rest of the criteria, I mean, I think there's a real valid reason for approving this. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. So we've heard from Mr. Mann and Mr. Wilson. First, I see Mr. Matlock is also appearing of record from city staff, but before finding out if he has anything to add, we'll go to the public hearing portion. My screen does not show any additional individuals. Does the city reflect anyone either physically present or remotely present who would like to be heard on this?
There's no one here at City Hall for the hearing.
Okay.
I do believe our attendees is their staff monitoring the hearing.
Okay, thank you. So we'll return then to the city staff. Mr. Baruch, this is your opportunity to respond, or if you wish to have Mr. Matlock respond as well. Is there anything you would like to say in response to the applicant's presentation?
Sure. Only a couple of small points. Lot corner is defined within the ordinance very specifically, and says it means that a lot has frontage on or abuts 2 or more intersecting streets. I agree that the diagram for fences does not depict every situation within the city, and there are some different lot configurations, and we just have to piece together the different components of the code and make our best application as it applies to, in this situation, a corner lot that just has 3 frontages. Code enforcement is on a complaint basis. So the reason this one is a point of visibility to the city is because we are reviewing the site infrastructure, the building permits, and we cannot allow what we're seeing as a violation of our code to continue without going through this process, or having the fence height reduced to meet the code requirements. Lastly, I would say that in a response email to Mike's email that Evan sent out, or that Mike responded to Evan saying that a variance would be the proper way to move forward. Tammy did mention that there was the potential issues with the one of the variance criteria at a minimum, which I believe was the second criteria, stating that the special conditions or circumstances exist on the lot. So there was some correspondence back in that initial chain of emails that stated there was some apprehension to the variance criteria. And then lastly, while the intent does spell out those 3 different criteria, staff does still believe that the fence regulations in our ordinance would still provide those privacy, safety, and a nice look to the community.
Okay. And did you wish Mr. Matlock to testify? It's your call. You're the planner involved in this application.
Sure, just very briefly.
Oh, okay, Mr. Matlock has chosen to. So let's have you sworn, Mr. Matlock. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, sir.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I would just reiterate what Alex just said. I think for us, it's an application of the code, which we think is pretty clear and unambiguous. So we've done that. And then regarding the variance of the proper procedure for relief from that code, if the criteria are met, and we just found that the criteria were not met. So that's the only issue for us. The examples of fences that are out of compliance, as Alex said, we do code enforcement based on a complaint basis. I live in the city and my commute is only about 7 minutes, and I can find half a dozen code violations on my way into work, but no one's complained. And that's just how the policy of the city is, and that's what the policy that the city council has put forward and we're to use, is working off a complaint basis. So that's the only thing I would add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to defer my decision long enough to see the PowerPoint. It was presented somewhat quickly, and I didn't get all the houses and information written down on my notes, so the PowerPoint will fill in a few gaps. So I'll anticipate it being sent to the city right away and then forwarded to me promptly, at which time I will render my decision within the next day or two. I don't see this one as too long to produce once I have all the information in front of me. So I apologize for the parties for not doing it today, but again, I'm not, without that information in front of me, I don't have a complete record to work off of, and I'll need that in order to do so. I do want to thank everybody. This is one of those where Mr. Mann.
Yeah, just do we, I guess typically after public hearing, the public portion, again, city and the applicant have a chance to speak. I guess there's a couple of points we'd like to make after city.
Okay, those are usually in response to the public hearing portion, not to the city's rebuttal. But what the heck? We're not in a rush, and
Sure.
If you would like to make additional response, I'm not going to have a problem with that. So go ahead.
Well, I think it's important to note that this has not been applied to new projects equally and evenly across the city. I mean, this code's been around for 40 years. It has been marginally applied, if ever, and it's only recently that somehow this is becoming an issue. We've developed in Tumwater before. It's never come up. There are fences that are being developed, not just fences that are done under the cover of night and aren't being code enforced. This has not been applied equally and evenly across the city. So if the city had a long record of saying, well, we've been pushing this thing on every project that's ever come in the door with a fence, then I would say that makes sense. But no, it hasn't been applied, and so now it is being pushed on this project as for whatever reason it came to the top, and now it's being pushed. And I think that's again, without any public benefit, it seems like it's kind of arbitrary and capricious to force this fence code in this one particular instance, when we've already established that there's zero safety concerns. There are legitimate privacy and security concerns for lot 29. Now, staff can say, well, we believe they still have privacy and we still believe that they have security. That's hogwash. That when you remove when you put visibility through someone's fence, they're clearly losing security and privacy. I mean, clearly, if someone can look over a 36-inch fence panel through a lattice fence, they've lost privacy and security, period. There was no other way to cut that. And so for staff to say, oh, well, they're going to still have privacy, that's disingenuous. I mean, if that was the case, we wouldn't build solid fences because it'd be a lot cheaper for us. But we build solid fences because people want privacy and they want security. So I think that for staff to make that argument is erroneous. And again, this is different than what is, I guess, condition one, right? Special conditions exist. The special conditions are the fact that the lots have changed. The way development happens in Tumwater has changed. Site distance is created simply by the fact that intersections have very large radius for sight distance. Those radii exist. They create all the sight distance necessary. So the conditions have changed to allow for this, where perhaps before there was a need for this, but this doesn't. Again, we recognize that the code it speaks directly to, I guess applied without any logic is yes, we recognize that the code doesn't capture all of this. So anyway, that was it. Just wanted to make sure those points were made. Kurt may have had another thought.
Those are appreciated. I thank you for those additional thoughts about this. Those are helpful thoughts.
And just one other piece I'll add, if I may, in that Sound Built Homes has built in Tumwater in subdivisions in the same situation and has built the 6-foot fence in this exact same condition and not had an issue. And that in new subdivisions, the city's argument that they don't police it, it's complaint based, that argument works when they don't have police power in the permitting process, when they are not when a house has already been built and signed off and they're no longer around or on site doing inspections. But in new construction, when homes are built, there's an inspection process and there's a final occupancy issued by the city. And at that time, these fences are installed and there's building inspections going on and the fence is in place during new construction. So what Evans is trying to illustrate here is the generality of, yes, there's conditions all around town of older homes and newer homes both that have the same condition going on. And the city's arguing that, well, they don't have an obligation because it's a code enforcement based on complaint basis. Well, they actually do, because in the newer houses that are being built in this corner lot configuration, if they're issuing certificates of occupancy, and 3 of those pictures are in situations where those homes were built by a builder that I know that provided the fence as part of the sale of the home, and the city signed off on occupancy. So there's not a hall pass here to say, well, it's not our obligation to enforce because of it's complaint based. It's during a permitting process that those were installed, just similar to ours. So I think that's our main point. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you. Ms. Brooke, you're not required to respond. Anything you want to add?
I guess the last thing that I would say is that Tammy and I both came on as staff 3 years ago, previous permitting staff that were doing the review and approval of fence height regulations as it concerned new developments over the past time. If it happened during the permitting process, we cannot speak to that necessarily. I will say that permits are not required for a 6-foot tall fence within a residential subdivision. So those are the only other points that I would mention, is that I feel like Tammy and I have applied this, in instances that we have seen this and questions that we get asked over the past 3 years.
Okay. All right. So thank you, all involved. This is an intelligent, well-meant, thoughtful discussion. Both sides have legitimate points to be made in this. I do want to see those last documents so that I have everything in front of me as I'm considering this. So anticipating that Mr. Mann will make those available to the city promptly, and they will then be forwarded to me. As soon as that happens, I'll get underway and get this off the plate so that the parties can finish out this project. And with that, I want to thank everybody for your participation and your eloquent comments. And I'll try to be as eloquent in my decision. With that, we're adjourned for the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.